I never thought I would make it to Everest. It wasn't a childhood dream, nor a youthful ambition, but sometimes life has a way of guiding us to places we never imagined. A year ago, I stood at a crossroads in life. I felt trapped in routines, in mundane days, like a never-ending cycle. Everything just passed by. Nothing changed, nothing new. I needed something, a challenge, something that could pull me out of the darkness and test my strength. So I decided to climb Mount Everest. I didn't know what I was thinking when I made that decision. As an ordinary person, I had never conquered a great mountain, never undergone extreme challenges, but I wanted a change. I wanted to seek a new sense of living. And Everest symbolizes all of that. The peak, the limitless challenges. It is a place where anything can happen. A place where you not only conquer nature, but also face your deepest fears. I wasn't prepared for what was to come. I thought life on Everest would be made up of wonderful moments, the feeling of victory as I touched the sky, beautiful pictures in the midst of wild nature. But I didn't know that there, I would have to face fears I couldn't have imagined, and ghosts I never thought would appear. That's why I started this journey, but not just to conquer Everest. I came to find myself, and I couldn't have imagined that this journey would change me forever. Day one on Everest, everything seemed perfect. The towering peaks, the clear sky, the freezing air biting into my skin. My companions and I began our ascent, step by step, climbing steep slopes, panting with every breath. The brief moments when I looked back at the surrounding landscape made me feel like part of the vastness of nature, as though I had blended into the eternity of the mountains. But soon after, a strange feeling began to emerge within me. It wasn't exhaustion, it wasn't the cold, it was a feeling of solitude, an indescribable emptiness. Even though I knew I was surrounded by a group of people, the voices of my companions suddenly felt distant, like echoes from another world. And in the silence of this space, it seemed as if the mountain wasn't only testing our bodies, but also melting away the defenses in our minds. Every step felt like it stretched into a century. As we climbed higher, I started to feel something was wrong. The cold seemed to grow stronger. Clouds began to cover the sky, blocking the light. The air grew heavy, as if the higher we climbed, the deeper we sank into an invisible abyss. I could sense the change not only in the surroundings, but also within myself. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I was being watched. Sometimes I turned around, but saw nothing but utter silence. No one was behind us. Yet that feeling didn't leave. Only the sound of wind howling through the cracks in the rocks, the crunch of footsteps on snow, and a sense that someone was watching my every step. On the second day, when I stood on a steep section, looking out over the vast valley, I couldn't help but think of all those who had tried their hand at Everest and the haunting stories of missing people. Fear started to rise within me, not because I feared the physical challenge, but a deeper, more intangible fear of things that couldn't be explained. We reached a small ravine where we had to leave the main path. A silence enveloped us. My companions all sensed it, but no one said anything. The tension was hidden in each person's eyes. Suddenly, the air became thick, as though some dark shadow was closing in around us. I noticed a very faint sign, a strange mark on the snow, but I didn't say anything. It was just a footprint, very faint, seemingly not ours. Then that night, we heard noises. On the third day, everything became more unclear than ever. We had climbed halfway, but the mountain no longer resembled what it was at first. The surroundings had completely changed. The towering peaks around us felt like solid walls, but they were cold and desolate, almost terrifying. At times I would stop and look back, but all I saw were mist-covered mountains, as if they were watching me, following my every step. I began to feel like I was lost in another dimension. Everything around me seemed blurry, as if I were moving through a nightmare. My companions were silent, and I could see the worry rising in their eyes. The feeling grew stronger by the minute. We no longer felt each other's presence. Each person seemed lost in their own world, not saying a word. And then, as we neared a cliff, a strange sensation suddenly rose in me. There was a sound, very faint, but enough to make me shiver. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal sound. It was a whisper, as if someone was calling my name. I turned around, but there was no one. Yet I couldn't erase the feeling. Something invisible, but very clear, was lingering around us. A shadow passed before my eyes and then quickly disappeared. My steps were no longer steady like before. As I continued climbing, I couldn't stop glancing around, as if something were chasing me. Something very close, yet unseen. The higher we climbed, the more I felt the space around me narrowing. Thick clouds surrounded us, and the path ahead was no longer visible. All we could hear were our footsteps echoing in the frightening silence. We no longer had the ability to turn back. And then night fell. We set up our tent, but no one could sleep. The cold didn't only come from the wind. There was a heavy, icy sensation from within our souls. We sat around the campfire, but no one said a word. Each flicker of the fire made me feel an invisible presence lingering nearby. The unseen ghosts were real, their presence evident in the air. A cold wind blew by, and then I heard another noise. It was the sound of footsteps, not ours. Slow, steady footsteps, but heavy, as if made by a giant creature. I could feel its presence. Something was near us. The footsteps grew clearer, closer, as if it was approaching our tent. I couldn't breathe. My eyes were wide open, staring into the darkness. I didn't dare to move, only watching outside, hoping something would happen to free us from this feeling. Then suddenly the footsteps stopped, and then a screech rang out from the darkness. Was it the wind? Number. It was a scream from something I couldn't define. The scream wasn't human, wasn't from an animal. It sounded like a soul trapped, wailing in endless agony. We couldn't stay there any longer. I hurriedly woke everyone up, and we rushed out of the tent. No thinking, no talking, just running. We ran, not caring about the footsteps, not caring about the darkness. Running as far as possible, but we didn't know where we were running to. The path had become familiar, yet unrecognizable, as if everything around us had transformed. Running through a world we couldn't comprehend. We can't just keep running like this. I gasped for breath, my eyes fixed on the dense darkness surrounding us. Everything could only get worse. It felt like an invisible force was pulling us forward towards something unseen, something incomprehensible. James, who had always been the strongest in the group, was the first to speak after the heavy silence. We need to stop. Maybe we should find somewhere to hide. Wait for things to calm down. I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, but we couldn't just keep running like this. Something was following us. James, I don't understand. Why has everything turned out like this? Why does it feel like we're being hunted? I asked, but no one could answer. I didn't want to admit I was afraid, but I was truly terrified. James stopped, turned to me, and it seemed like he had wanted to say something for a long time. There are some stories that no one wants to hear around here. His voice was low, serious. Stories that are only whispered in secret conversations among climbers. Strange deaths, disappearances with no clear reason. They just vanish. I looked at James, my heart full of worry. Disappearances? What do you mean? People just disappear without a trace? James nodded, his eyes gazing into the distance, as if recalling things I couldn't bring myself to believe. This isn't a joke, really. He continued, "There are people who climb Everest, but they never come back down. Only their bodies are found at altitudes no one would ever expect. People say there's something deadly up there, in those deep and dark places, places where sunlight can't reach. Climbers say they feel like someone is following them, hear footsteps, but when they turn around, there's no one. The deaths happen with no explanation. And the one thing they all have in common is they come from different countries and none of them ever knew each other. So, what are we, what are we going to face here?" I felt a chill down my spine. My legs suddenly became heavy, each step feeling like a battle. James sighed and I could see the fear in his eyes. "That's what worries me. Experienced climbers say there's an invisible force here, on the top of Everest, and it never lets anyone leave without paying a price." He paused, then turned to look at me. "There are rumors about ghosts on Everest, the souls of climbers who died, unable to find peace, wandering everywhere. Some people say they hear whispers in the wind, hear footsteps when no one's there. And the scary part is, some people start hearing those sounds as they climb the highest peaks." I couldn't breathe. "So we're in their territory now?" My voice trembled. "We're among the trapped souls?" James didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with sadness. "I don't know, but there are signs, things we can't ignore." Silence fell. Only the sound of wind howling through the cracks in the rocks. I couldn't believe what I had just heard, but the strange feeling in James's worried look made it impossible for me to dismiss it. Something was wrong, an inexplicable feeling, a feeling that could only exist in places like this, on cold, dark mountaintops, where life and death are separated by just one step. "We need to leave here," James said, and I could feel the urgency in his voice. But no matter how much I wanted to, a part of me couldn't do it. A part of me wanted to stay, to face whatever awaited us, even knowing that it might be the worst decision of my life. We continued walking, but the atmosphere grew thicker with each step. With every footfall, I felt the cold seeping deep into my bones. The snow had fallen thicker, the wind was blowing harder, but nothing could diminish the strange feeling that enveloped this place. James led the way, his eyes constantly scanning around, as if searching for something. Charles and I walked behind, still silent, but I could feel the tension in each of his steps. No one spoke, but we all felt the presence of something invisible, yet very real. A life, or a death, was following us. And then we saw it. A grave. Not a normal grave, but an old, forgotten one, buried deep in the white snow. It was not a place where climbers would stop, but there it was, lying quietly in the vast, desolate space. James and I stopped, staring at the grave. A strange sign. A large stone was placed on top of the tombstone. "This is not an ordinary grave," I said, my voice full of doubt. "Something's not right." James nodded, his eyes darkening. "I feel the same way." He stepped closer and lifted the stone. Beneath it was something strange, an old decayed wooden plank, which seemed to have some writing, though it had faded with time. "It can't be," I gasped. "This is a grave, but not of a climber. There's something different about this grave." "This is a warning," James said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the wooden plank. Suddenly a sound rang out. Crack! A sharp noise, like something breaking, came from behind us. We all turned around but saw nothing. Everything fell silent again. Yet the unexplainable feeling lingered, as if eyes were watching us, filling the space around us. "Let's move quickly," I said, not wanting to stop any longer. "We need to go. This is not a place to stay." But as we started moving, I felt a weight on my shoulders. A ghostly presence was following us. I couldn't speak, but I could feel it clearly. Something was wrong on Everest. The ghosts, the souls that had died, they had fallen into this place, and they didn't want to let us go easily. The footsteps echoed again, not ours, not anyone in our group. The footsteps were slow, steady, as if coming closer. I turned around, but there was no one. The snow had piled up so thick that I couldn't make out what might be hiding within it. "Run!" I shouted, and without saying another word, the group immediately ran forward. But not everyone could run fast. Charles tripped over a large rock and fell to the ground. I pulled him up, but he didn't speak, just stared at me with empty eyes. "Charles, we have to go," I screamed, but he kept staring at the space around us, as if he couldn't hear me. James pulled me back. "Don't you see? We're being followed." And when I turned around to look, I realized a shadow was lurking behind us. Not a human. It was a vague shape, unclear, but I could feel its presence. "Run!" I had no other choice. My legs felt heavy, but I couldn't stop. Not when something terrifying was chasing me. Not when life and death were just one step apart. We ran, and behind us, the footsteps continued to echo, getting closer with every step, until nothing was left but the darkness surrounding us. We didn't dare look back. With every step we took, the weight grew heavier. The snow had piled up so thick that with each step, it felt like we were sinking into the ground. That feeling, the feeling that something was chasing us, was impossible to shake. It was as if that shadow was growing, swallowing up all the light around us. The night was pitch black, the snow a blinding white. Somewhere the wind howled, like the scream of a trapped soul. "We can't keep going," I screamed, barely able to breathe. I saw James, his eyes wide with fear. "What do you think? Stop, and then what?" James turned to look at me, his face pale. "This is no joke anymore. We're in a place where no one can save us." Charles, now regaining his composure, pointed ahead. "That cave, it might be the only safe place." A faint outline of a cave appeared in the night, something strange but inviting. It wasn't that we wanted to go there, but because we had no other choice. The whole group rushed towards the cave entrance. "I don't think we can stay here long," Charles spoke up, his voice filled with worry. I looked around. We were standing in a narrow gorge, jagged rocks rising into towering cliffs. But what unsettled me wasn't the cold cave. It was the feeling that something else was here with us. An indescribable sensation. A feeling as if someone was standing right next to us, watching us from the shadows. "There's no one else here," I tried to reassure myself, but I knew I was lying. Just as I finished speaking, a faint noise echoed from deep within the cave. "Someone's here," James whispered, his face drained of color. The three of us froze, not daring to move, only listening in the darkness. The soft, steady sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere within the cave. This feeling was like being lost in a space with no way out, where every sound made you want to run. "We can't stay here any longer," I said, and we all agreed. But as we were about to turn back, a faint light appeared at the far end of the cave, flickering like a torch burning. That light drew closer, and I could hear a hissing sound, like the breath of a bloodthirsty beast. "Run!" I didn't have time to think, grabbing James and Charles's hands and running out. The light behind us grew closer, but we couldn't stop. No time to look back, no time to see what was chasing us. Just then, I heard a loud noise, like thunder, and suddenly a massive shadow charged toward us. It was a shape I couldn't imagine. Not human, not animal. It was just a giant shadow, faceless, formless. But the presence it carried, it took my breath away. It was a primal fear, inexplicable, as if something so large was crushing everything around us. We ran, but our legs were no longer steady. The more we ran, the closer the shadow got. We could do nothing but run faster, but we could never reach a safe distance. The darkness around us seemed to devour us. We ran like we had never run before. All three of us, not a word spoken, just our eyes filled with fear, fixed ahead as we sprinted toward the faint light at the end of the cave. Our heavy breathing echoed in the silence as if we were running from our very lives. Each step felt heavier, but I couldn't stop. Finally, we escaped the cave. The cold, biting air hit our faces, but the feeling of safety seemed to return. We stopped, gasping for air, our eyes still locked on the darkness behind us. There was nothing there, only the silent, cold expanse of Everest. We, we really made it, I gasped, still unable to believe my eyes. Looks like it, James said, his voice still trembling. But then he looked at me, and a tired smile appeared on his face. But we can't stop here. If we stop, something else might show up. Charles pointed ahead, where the light from torches was slowly flickering through the darkness. We keep moving. We have no other choice. And so, we continued our journey. We didn't dare stop for long. The strange thing was, the higher we climbed, the fewer people we saw coming down. The tracks in the snow, the strange sounds from behind, seemed not only to be happening to us, but also indicated the presence of others, those who had passed through and left their marks. Suddenly we encountered a group of people coming down. They were dressed in full mountaineering gear, but their faces didn't show the exhaustion we felt. It seemed like they had completed their journey. One of them, a middle-aged man, looked at us and smiled lightly. "How far have you come?" he asked, his voice hoarse, as if he had spoken too much over the past few days. "We've just made it part way, but we've encountered some strange things," James replied, a bit tired but trying to stay calm. "There's something strange here, something we can't explain." The man looked at us intently, his eyes lighting up slightly, as if he already knew something. "Yes," he said, his voice lowering. "You're not the first to feel that way. Other climbers have experienced strange things here, and I'm no exception." We stopped, listening carefully, as if this conversation might explain what we'd experienced. "I've heard about the ghosts on Everest," the man continued, "but there's another story I've heard from older climbers. They say that when you climb too high, there are souls that cannot move on, still lingering. They come from those who died trying to conquer this mountain, and they never leave." A woman in the group added, her voice low and serious, "Some say that if you don't find the summit, the mountain won't let you leave. Those souls will pull you into a place where no one can escape." "So what did you do?" I asked, my voice trembling, but filled with curiosity. The man looked at me with a serious gaze. "We left. There's no reason to keep going if you felt that presence. If you continue, you'll be fighting not just the mountain, but its soul as well." He paused, then added, "Be careful. The things you see on Everest aren't always what you think." We stood still, watching the climbers as they walked past us, as if nothing had happened. They left us, 3 people, standing in a place where everything had begun to spiral out of control. "What do we do now?" I turned to James and Charles. Both of them were silent, just looking at each other as if unsure of what would happen next. "Keep going," James said finally. "We have no choice." And so we continued walking, filled with doubts, but unable to turn back. Everest wasn't just a mountain. It was a world full of secrets, haunting forces that we had only just begun to uncover. Could we overcome it all to reach the summit? Only time would tell. We continued climbing, but the atmosphere had changed. Although the stories we had just heard made me shiver, I couldn't stop thinking about them. Are there really wandering souls on Everest? Are we walking into their territory? The questions kept swirling in my mind, but no one in the group dared speak them out loud. We just kept walking in the eerie silence. The 4th night was approaching. The snow fell thicker and the wind began to pick up. We set up camp, drained of energy, our hearts full of anxiety. I sat down holding the flashlight in my hand, but its dim light couldn't chase away the coldness in my heart. Something was waiting for us ahead, and we couldn't understand what it was. Charles was the first to break the silence. "I can't do this anymore." He looked at us, his face pale. "Something's not right. I feel like I'm being watched, and not by other climbers. There's something we can't see, but it's definitely here." James frowned, worry clear on his face. "What do you think?" I asked, but James just shook his head. I don't know. There are times when I feel like we're being pulled, but I can't understand why. Suddenly, a sound came from outside. All three of us froze, our eyes filled with confusion. Someone was out there. It wasn't the sound of wind, it wasn't an animal. It was footsteps, clear, steady, as if someone was walking around our tent. Probably just an animal, I tried to explain, but the worry in my chest couldn't be dismissed. James stood up, turning to look at me. If it's an animal, why are they getting so close? He whispered. Something's not right. I feel it. It's really close. We listened, but the footsteps didn't stop, as if they were drawing nearer. Then suddenly, there was a sharp sound. It was a scratching noise on the ground, as if something was being dragged from afar, and then it stopped. This sound, it wasn't from any animal I knew. We have to go outside, I stood up, trying to keep calm. We opened the tent and stepped outside, the flashlight in my hand illuminating the path ahead. The snow had thickened, and the cold air made it hard to breathe deeply. But still, we saw nothing. Everything was silent, as if nothing had happened. We stood there for a long time, not daring to go back into the tent. The feeling of being watched weighed heavily on us. Finally, James spoke. We can't keep going. I can't stay here. We have to go down. The higher we go, the stranger things get. There's something waiting for us. So where will we go? I asked, though a part of me didn't want to give up. Charles looked into the distance, where the darkness had completely taken over. We have to keep going up to the summit of Everest. Only there will we find the answer. And so we continued to climb. Despite our fear, despite the inexplicable feeling, we had no choice. We were so close to the summit. One more step, and the answer would come. The price of the truth could be death, but we couldn't turn back. We couldn't give up. This journey would end when we discovered the truth, whether we faced the spirits of the dead or not. As we continued to climb, I couldn't help but think of those who had died on Everest before. Had they really vanished forever? Or were they just waiting for us to come and claim a part of their fate? One thing was certain, we would never be the last to climb Everest. The fifth day on Everest, and our endurance was running out. The sky was covered in clouds, snow falling thicker and colder than ever. Each step now felt like a battle. We weren't just fighting the mountain, but also our own bodies. Our physical strength had begun to weaken. Day by day, the steps became harder. The cold cut into our skin, and my hands had lost all sensation. I tried to cling to hope, but the higher we went, the thinner the air became, and breathing grew much more difficult. James was ahead, his eyes tired, no longer holding the hopeful light they once had. We had no food left, and our water had run out yesterday. Each step felt like it dragged on for hours. We can't continue like this, Charles gasped, his voice filled with despair. I looked at my backpack. There was nothing left but a few old, crumbled energy bars. Water? None. Food? Gone. The energy bars weren't enough to sustain us, and the thin air made it even harder to digest anything. Come on, we're almost there, I tried to reassure the group, though I was worried myself. The summit of Everest was no easy destination. It was a challenge not only physically but mentally, and now everything was against us. That feeling, the feeling that we had lost our connection with reality, was becoming more and more pronounced. We kept going, though each step felt like a desperate effort. When I saw James struggling with each step, I couldn't help but remember the warnings from the other climbers. The summit of Everest is never easy, but this time, it wasn't just about physical challenges. The lack of supplies was weakening us, both physically and mentally. We didn't have enough energy to continue. A sigh echoed, and Charles stopped. I can't go any further. His voice was weak, and I knew, with his current state, he couldn't continue. I turned to look at him, trying to help him stand, but he collapsed to the ground, his knees unable to bear his weight. We hadn't prepared for this. Not enough food, not enough water, and most importantly, not enough strength to go on. "We have to stop," James panted. "We can't go on like this. We need to rest." But how could we rest? We were too close to the summit, yet too far to turn back. "Come on, just a little more," I said, but my resolve was starting to waver. Everyone in the group seemed exhausted. I could feel the collapse in every step I took. We no longer had many options. No more food to sustain our strength. No more water to keep us alert. We were walking into a world where survival was becoming impossible. "We can't die here," I told myself, trying to find whatever strength was left. I looked up, seeing the summit hanging high above, but it seemed so far, like a mere illusion. Everything had become blurry. The surroundings seemed like a fog, no longer clear, no longer defined. "Can you hear that?" Charles whispered, but I couldn't make out what he said. I turned to look at him, his eyes vacant, as if he had lost all hope. "Someone's watching us," he said, but I wasn't sure if it was true or if his exhaustion was making him paranoid. Suddenly, I felt like something was approaching. It wasn't a living creature, not a person. It was something I couldn't describe, an invisible presence, yet so tangible. "Keep going," I shouted, trying to push away the fear. The group stood up, tired and pain. We had nothing but our mental strength to keep going. One step, just one more step. As we continued, I realized something. We weren't just facing Mount Everest. We were facing ourselves. Our physical strength was drained. Our spirits were broken. But Everest was not just a physical challenge. It was a psychological battle. We weren't climbing this mountain just to prove our physical strength, but to overcome the limits we had set for ourselves. The group kept going, unaware that life and death were now only a step apart. Our steps were no longer certain. Exhausted, each step was a battle. The snow continued to fall heavily, and the wind grew stronger, as if it were pushing us away from our goal. Everything was becoming hazy. The summit of Everest now seemed like a faint illusion in my eyes, something we could reach, but always just out of our grasp. "I can't do this anymore," Charles said, his voice weak, his eyes full of exhaustion. He could no longer stand upright. His body seemed to be collapsing under the strain. I looked at his legs, no longer able to keep going. "We have to keep going," I panted, my voice less certain than before. "We're almost there." But how could we continue when our bodies had no strength left? How could we keep going when we felt like we were sinking into a dark, inescapable place? James looked at me, his eyes vacant. "We have no water, no food. We'll die here if we don't turn back." His voice trembled, his hands gripping his backpack tightly, but I could clearly see the despair in his eyes. "I'm scared. I'm scared we won't make it." That feeling, the growing sense of desperation, was rising in my chest. With each step, I felt like a part of me was shutting down. But I couldn't speak that out loud. I couldn't let them see my weakness. We couldn't stop. But then, something strange happened. When I looked up through the thick fog, I saw a figure. At first, I thought it was a hallucination. But no, it was a person, a man standing silently in the midst of the white snow. He didn't move, just stood there like a ghost. His eyes were deep, dark voids. "Is anyone there?" I called out loudly, but the man didn't respond. Only a strange smile appeared on his face, a smile not of a human. We stood there, unable to move, staring at him. I turned to look at James and Charles, but they didn't see anything. They just saw me standing there, staring into empty space. "We have to keep going," I said, my voice almost choked, trying not to let fear overwhelm me. "Let's go!" And we continued. But it wasn't easy. The feeling, the shadow I had just seen, still lingered with me. Even though we had moved away from it, that figure was still deeply etched in my mind, as if it were watching us from behind. The sixth night came, and the cold became unbearable. The group was facing unimaginable challenges, not only because our physical strength was drained, but also because our spirits were beginning to crumble. We had little water left, a few broken energy bars, Hunger and thirst made it impossible for us to continue our journey easily. I felt like I was walking into a land with no escape. The higher we climbed, the thinner the air became, and everything grew more and more ambiguous. "How much further?" Charles asked, his eyes growing dull from exhaustion. I looked around, but all I saw was the vast white snow. "We don't have the strength." James didn't say anything, just shook his head. "I think we made a mistake continuing." Fear, anxiety, and despair had overtaken us. Something wasn't right. Maybe Everest wasn't a place where humans could easily conquer. We weren't the first to come here, but could we be the last to survive? And then a strange sound broke the silence of the night. A prolonged sound like heavy breathing echoed from a dark corner ahead. I turned to look at the terrified faces of Charles and James. None of us dared speak. The sound came again, clearer, closer. A wheezing breath, as if someone was trying to say something. "We can't stay here," I said, my voice low and full of determination. "We need to go down the mountain, right now." But when we turned around, a strange truth began to emerge. We couldn't remember the way back. Everything was hazy, as if everything around us was changing. We were in the midst of a delirium, a nightmare we couldn't wake from. We kept moving, but each step felt more and more pointless. Everest wasn't just a mountain, it was an insurmountable challenge. Not just physically, but mentally. The obsessions, the fears were slowly consuming us. But we couldn't stop. We had to keep going, knowing that the cost of survival could be a meaningless sacrifice. Something was waiting for us ahead, but would we be able to reach it? Or would we be left with nothing but the devastation, the haunting presence of the ghosts who have never been able to leave Everest for so long? The seventh day on Everest. Our legs were too tired. Every step felt like dragging the weight of the world. No more food, no more water. We were completely drained. But what was more frightening was the feeling, the sensation that something was waiting for us ahead, watching us from the rocks and deep crevices. "We're almost at the summit," I said, but my voice was no longer strong. I tried to hide my exhaustion, but in James and Charles's eyes, I knew they had noticed. We had no way back. We continued climbing, each step a struggle, and then suddenly a faint light appeared ahead. It wasn't a normal light. It was a strange, weak, flickering light, like a torch in the darkness. "What is that?" James asked, his eyes full of doubt. We moved closer, not saying anything, but my heart was pounding faster and faster. That light wasn't the light of a regular torch. It had a pale, eerie green hue, like something glowing from within the darkness, from the cracks in the rocks. "We have to check it out." I didn't know why I said that, but my legs automatically moved toward the light. I felt something pulling me, a strange compulsion that I couldn't explain. As we got closer, the light became clearer. It was something shimmering, but not gold or metal. It was an object glowing strangely, like a black stone emitting a faint, eerie green glow. It lay between a large rock, as if hidden, yet impossible to ignore. "What is it?" Charles whispered, his eyes full of curiosity, but I could sense the fear hidden in his voice. "I don't know," I said, stepping closer and reaching out to touch the stone. "But something's not right." The moment my hand touched the stone, a freezing sensation spread from my hand, coursing through my body. A loud noise like stone breaking echoed. I jumped back in shock, but it was too late. The stone, which I had thought was stationary, suddenly began to move. "What the hell?" James screamed. But we didn't stop. The black stone began to bloom, as though something inside it was trying to escape. And then from within it, a cold wave rushed at us. A laugh rang out. It wasn't the laugh of a human, but a strange, eerie laugh emanating from inside the stone. The feeling of dread overwhelmed us, as if everything around us began to vanish. The pale green light now became a strange energy, wrapping tightly around us. "Run!" I shouted, quickly pulling Charles and James to run away. But something was pulling us back. Heavy, slow footsteps, as though someone or something was pulling us back toward the strange stone. "We have to get out of here!" James yelled, his eyes filled with panic. We turned and ran, but it wasn't the same path. There were no traces of the way we had come. Everything had changed. The familiar rocks now seemed like monsters, shifting shapes and closing in on us. The strange feeling spread throughout my body, as if we were lost in another world. "Move faster!" I shouted, but my legs felt like they had no strength left. We kept running through the thickening darkness, not knowing where the exit was, not knowing what awaited us ahead. Then the laughter rang out again. But this time, it wasn't just laughter. It was a screech, like the sound of some creature moving fast toward us. The pale green light still followed us, but we couldn't see anything except the blinding white snow. We couldn't stop. That was the last thing I thought about as the cold and darkness surrounded us. Everest wasn't just a test of health, it was a test of the mind. And I knew at that moment we were facing things we couldn't explain. We couldn't turn back, but we didn't know if we could keep going. Something terrifying was waiting for us ahead, and I wasn't sure if I would have the strength to face it. We ran, but we no longer had enough strength. Each step felt like an insurmountable challenge. The snow still fell, and the sky was pitch black, as if it wanted to swallow us whole. But that strange feeling, the feeling of being watched, still lingered. Everything seemed to be closing in on us, the space around us tightening. "I can't go on!" Charles suddenly screamed, causing me to turn around and look. He had fallen into the snow, clutching his leg. I rushed to him and saw he was holding his ankle. "My leg! I think I've twisted it." His voice was weak, sweat pouring down his forehead, despite the bone-chilling cold. "No way," James said, looking down at Charles's leg, then at me. "Can you walk, Charles?" Charles tried to stand but couldn't, his leg clearly injured. "No, I can't. You two keep going." He was breathing heavily, his eyes tired but determined. "I'll go back down. You need to reach the summit. I'll be fine." I looked at James, not knowing what to do. I didn't want to leave Charles alone, but we had no choice. The summit of Everest, despite all its dangers, was the only goal left. Charles, though exhausted and injured, had made a decision. "You can't stay here with me," Charles said, looking at me one last time. "Go. Try to reach the summit. Everything will be okay." "Are you sure?" I asked, my heart aching. Charles nodded, giving a weak smile. "Go." With heavy hearts, James and I nodded, turned, and began climbing again. The group had been split. We continued to climb, but this time, it felt like we were climbing alone. The weight felt heavier than ever, not only because we were physically drained, but because Charles's parting gaze haunted me. We couldn't turn back. We couldn't help him. There were only two of us now, James and me. The air grew thinner. Each step now felt like it stretched on forever, and the space around us seemed to change completely. Snow, rocks, and darkness. But we couldn't stop. There was no way out but to keep going. We had climbed a little higher. Suddenly, a sound rang out again. "Someone is coming closer," James whispered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Can you hear that?" I nodded but didn't say anything. The footsteps, faint, slow, but clearly someone was moving in the darkness. Was it a person? Or something else? We stopped, eyes fixed on the surrounding darkness. There was something in the air, an invisible presence, as if everything was closing in on us from all sides. "No way," I said, trying to reassure myself. "It's just the sound of the snow or the wind." But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us from the darkness. Faint sounds as if something was lurking, moving around us. And then suddenly, a shadow appeared in front of us. Both James and I jumped, eyes wide, hearts pounding. "Who's there?" I yelled, but the shadow didn't answer. It just stood there in the snow, motionless, yet there was a strange presence about it. James stepped forward, trying to stay calm. "Who are you?" His voice rang out, but there was still no response. The shadow just stood still, staring at us, and in the dim light, I saw it more clearly. It was a human shape, but not fully. It looked like a person, but wasn't. It was a ghost. "Run!" James screamed, pulling me back. But when we turned to look, the shadow was gone. Only darkness and the cold space surrounded us. James and I ran, not daring to look back. We didn't stop, but the snow still fell, the wind still blew, and that strange feeling still clung to us. The higher we climbed, the stranger things became. Not just the lack of supplies, but now we were facing things we couldn't explain. Invisible creatures, ghosts haunting us. We no longer knew where we were going, but one thing was certain. We couldn't stop. We kept running, but couldn't escape that feeling. The darkness seemed thicker, as if the whole space was slowly suffocating us. The snow still fell, but not like normal snow. The cold wasn't just from the weather, it came from the heavy, oppressive air around us. James didn't say anything, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We ran past sharp rocks, through deep crevices, not knowing where the exit was, just knowing we had to keep going. "I feel it's getting closer," James whispered, his shoulders trembling, as if he was fighting against something invisible but terrifying. "I feel the same," I said, but my voice choked in my throat. "It's not a person. It's not an animal. It's something else." And then we stopped. A faint sound rang out from somewhere in the darkness ahead. Footsteps. This time, it wasn't our footsteps, but something else, slow and heavy. The sound was like something moving in the snow, but not human. A creature, but not definable. "We have to turn back," James said, and I could hear the trembling in his voice. But we couldn't turn back. We couldn't stop. Suddenly, I felt the cold intensify rapidly. My whole body seemed to freeze in this space. Not from the snow, but from that presence. Something very close, but invisible. Only the feeling it brought. That feeling as if something or someone was standing right behind us. But when we turned around, there was nothing. "I hear it," I said, my voice trembling. "It's standing behind us." James turned around, but there was nothing but the white snow surrounding us. No one. Nothing. Only the dead silence and the coldness. I shook my head, not understanding. "It's real, but it's not human." And then suddenly a laugh echoed. Not the laugh of a human. It was a haunting, raspy laugh, like the screech of a creature not from this world. It rang from behind, then a voice, not one of us, but a voice unclear, as if it came from the bottom of a deep chasm. "Don't run away!" The voice was threatening, heavy, as if pulling us into an endless obsession. I looked at James, not knowing what to do. I didn't want to leave Charles alone, but we had no choice. The summit of Everest, despite all its dangers, was the only goal left. Charles, though exhausted and injured, had made a decision. "You can't stay here with me," Charles said, looking at me one last time. "Go. Try to reach the summit. Everything will be okay." "Are you sure?" I asked, my heart aching. Charles nodded, giving a weak smile. "Go." With heavy hearts, James and I nodded, turned, and began climbing again. The group had been split. We continued to climb, but this time, it felt like we were climbing alone. The weight felt heavier than ever, not only because we were physically drained, but because Charles's parting gaze haunted me. We couldn't turn back. We couldn't help him. There were only two of us now, James and me. The air grew thinner. Each step now felt like it stretched on forever, and the space around us seemed to change completely. Snow, rocks, and darkness. But we couldn't stop. There was no way out but to keep going. We had climbed a little higher. Suddenly, a sound rang out again. "Someone is coming closer," James whispered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Can you hear that?" I nodded but didn't say anything. The footsteps, faint, slow, but clearly someone was moving in the darkness. Was it a person? Or something else? We stopped, eyes fixed on the surrounding darkness. There was something in the air, an invisible presence, as if everything was closing in on us from all sides. "No way," I said, trying to reassure myself. "It's just the sound of the snow or the wind." But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us from the darkness. Faint sounds as if something was lurking, moving around us. And then suddenly, a shadow appeared in front of us. Both James and I jumped, eyes wide, hearts pounding. "Who's there?" I yelled, but the shadow didn't answer. It just stood there in the snow, motionless, yet there was a strange presence about it. James stepped forward, trying to stay calm. "Who are you?" His voice rang out, but there was still no response. The shadow just stood still, staring at us, and in the dim light, I saw it more clearly. It was a human shape, but not fully. It looked like a person, but wasn't. It was a ghost. "Run!" James screamed, pulling me back. But when we turned to look, the shadow was gone. Only darkness and the cold space surrounded us. James and I ran, not daring to look back. We didn't stop, but the snow still fell, the wind still blew, and that strange feeling still clung to us. The higher we climbed, the stranger things became. Not just the lack of supplies, but now we were facing things we couldn't explain. Invisible creatures, ghosts haunting us. We no longer knew where we were going, but one thing was certain. We couldn't stop. We kept running, but couldn't escape that feeling. The darkness seemed thicker, as if the whole space was slowly suffocating us. The snow still fell, but not like normal snow. The cold wasn't just from the weather, it came from the heavy, oppressive air around us. James didn't say anything, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We ran past sharp rocks, through deep crevices, not knowing where the exit was, just knowing we had to keep going. "I feel it's getting closer," James whispered, his shoulders trembling, as if he was fighting against something invisible but terrifying. "I feel the same," I said, but my voice choked in my throat. "It's not a person. It's not an animal. It's something else." And then we stopped. A faint sound rang out from somewhere in the darkness ahead. Footsteps. This time, it wasn't our footsteps, but something else, slow and heavy. The sound was like something moving in the snow, but not human. A creature, but not definable. "We have to turn back," James said, and I could hear the trembling in his voice. But we couldn't turn back. We couldn't stop. Suddenly, I felt the cold intensify rapidly. My whole body seemed to freeze in this space. Not from the snow, but from that presence. Something very close, but invisible. Only the feeling it brought. That feeling as if something or someone was standing right behind us. But when we turned around, there was nothing. "I hear it," I said, my voice trembling. "It's standing behind us." James turned around, but there was nothing but the white snow surrounding us. No one. Nothing. Only the dead silence and the coldness. I shook my head, not understanding. "It's real, but it's not human." And then suddenly a laugh echoed. Not the laugh of a human. It was a haunting, raspy laugh, like the screech of a creature not from this world. It rang from behind, then a voice, not one of us, but a voice unclear, as if it came from the bottom of a deep chasm. "Don't run away!" The voice was threatening, heavy, as if pulling us into an endless obsession. We knew Everest would never let anyone leave easily, and with each step we were facing not only the mountain, but also the ghost trapped within it. We couldn't sleep. All three of us were exhausted, drained, but no one dared close their eyes. The cold of Everest, the lack of resources, and the darkness surrounding us made sleep seem like an impossible thing. But then, a terrible fatigue began to set in, my eyes slowly closing, unable to resist it. And then I fell into a deep sleep. The space around me was no longer white snow and rocky mountains. It became something else, a dark, ominous place. I couldn't see clearly, but I could feel a cold breeze surrounding me. There was something, a figure standing far away watching me. "Why did you come here?" The voice rang out in the darkness, but it wasn't any of us. It was cold, powerful, and profoundly deep, as if echoing from the depths of the mountain. I jolted awake, but couldn't move. The figure moved closer, slowly revealing itself. A woman with long black hair, dressed in ancient clothes, stood before me. "I am the spirit of Everest," she said, her voice like a whisper from the abyss. "You cannot overcome this challenge without understanding the words I will say." I wanted to speak, but couldn't. Only the dense silence surrounded us, and her gaze pierced into my soul. "Everest is not for everyone," she said, and when she spoke the mountain's name, it sounded like a warning. "The souls trapped at this summit are not here by chance. You won't leave easily." She turned and walked towards a thick fog. I couldn't see clearly anymore, but it felt like she was leading me. I've lived on Everest since ancient times, and I've witnessed countless souls pass through here, but not everyone can reach the summit. "Why can't anyone leave?" I asked, my voice out of control, as if these words weren't mine.
With the guidance from that strange dream, we began to understand. We weren't conquering Everest. We were conquering the fears inside each of us. The ghosts weren't just the souls of the dead, but the obsessions, the fears that hadn't been resolved in our minds. And so, we, with the newfound mental strength, continued to climb, not just to conquer the mountain, but to conquer ourselves. The summit of Everest wasn't the ultimate destination. What mattered more was that this journey had helped us understand that only by overcoming our fears could we truly achieve our goal. The change in feeling was immediate when we continued to climb. No longer was there anxiety, no longer was there vague fear or the feeling of being watched, but a new strength, a determination stronger than ever before. We walked as if we had come to understand Everest, ourselves, and the things we faced, not just the mountain, but the invisible fears within. "We can do this," I said, my voice full of resolve. James and Charles nodded. They no longer had uncertainty in their eyes. We didn't need to speak much. We knew, as long as we kept moving, we would find the way. Not the path that Everest led us on, but the path we each found within ourselves. The snow still fell, but we no longer felt the cold as we had before. We no longer fought the cold. We fought our own fears, and that was what we had to face. Then, when we reached a high peak, everything changed again. Not because we were closer to the summit of Everest, but because something strange appeared before us. A light, but not the light of the sun. It was a faint, greenish light, coming from a narrow crack in a nearby rock. This light wasn't a torch, or something humans could light. It seemed like an invisible energy, but with an intense pull. "Go to it," Charles said, and I could feel the curiosity, the strength in his voice. We moved closer to that light, and as we approached, I saw a stone door, an ancient door engraved with strange symbols I had never seen before. This stone door wasn't like any door I had ever known. It wasn't a human door. It was like a threshold between two worlds. "What is this?" I whispered, not daring to touch the door. James stopped, his eyes full of fear. "Do you remember what the spirit said in the dream?" he asked, and I nodded. "If we step through this, will we really enter Everest summit, or enter another world?" The strange feeling, like something pulling us again, enveloped the space. We had come too far to turn back, but did we have the courage to step through that door? "We'll know after we step through," I said, my voice more certain than ever. And so, we stepped in. As we passed through the stone door, everything changed immediately. It wasn't the vast space of Everest anymore. It was another world, like an eternal realm, full of greenish light. The three of us stood there, unable to understand. We were no longer on Everest. We were in a strange space, a space that didn't belong to this world. I looked around, and everything was unfamiliar. The stones glimmered with green light, and thick fog swirled around our feet. But there was something very strange here, something unlike anywhere I had ever seen. "Where are we?" Charles asked, his voice filled with amazement. "We're in a place that can't be explained," I said, my eyes still fixed on this strange space. This isn't Everest's summit, it's another realm, a place where all the souls are trapped. Suddenly, a voice echoed from deep within this space. Congratulations! The voice was cold, but full of wisdom. You have overcome yourselves, overcome your fears. You deserve to know the truth. I turned to look, but saw no one. Only the voice echoed in this eerie space. Everest isn't just a test of the body, it's a gateway to different worlds. The souls that couldn't move on are trapped here, and you are the lucky ones who have passed the test, but not everyone can escape it. This world isn't yours. The voice rang out again, this time stronger. You can't stay here forever, but you can return to tell this story. The story of those who overcame their fears and found the truth. I looked at James and Charles, and then we all understood. We had found the truth, not about Everest, but about ourselves. We had conquered the fears in our minds, and now we could return. We need to go, I said, my voice full of determination. We've completed this journey. Now it's time to go back. We turned around, stepped out of the stone door, and suddenly the space around us returned to what it had been. We stood on Everest's summit, where the snow still covered the ground, the wind still blew strongly, but now I felt at peace.